Thank you for attending this virtual conference hosted by IEP Inc. We are going to get started tonight. We would like to welcome you all and thank you all for attending our webinar. We are pleased to present three panelists tonight who will go in the order of the first panelist will be Dr. Dunson, the second panelist will be Ms. Winston, and the third panelist will be Ms. VanCleef. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Dunson. Dr. Dunson is an author, a senior literacy therapist, and special education advocate who is board certified by the American Academy of Special Education Professionals. He is the creator of the English Code Language Training System and wrote the book Success for Kids with Dyslexia and Other Reading Difficulties. He is a strong proponent for evidence-based reading research. Dr. Dunson served on the International Dyslexia Association Board of Directors for the Houston branch. He has been a guest on NPR and Project Baltimore, as well as presented to the Maryland State Board of Education, Maryland Higher Education Commission, the Maryland House of Delegates and Senate on the importance of evidence-based reading instruction. He has served as an expert witness and educational advocate and served on the Right to Read Maryland Coalition. Dr. Dunson has also served as an adjunct professor in Loyola University Maryland's Graduate School of Education, where he taught evidence-based reading instruction to public and private school educators. And he is a former member of the Maryland State Department of Education Elementary Education Literacy Work Group, a committee chartered to revise the 4 reading courses at the college and university level that teachers must complete in order to obtain state certification. So we would like to welcome Dr. Dunson.
Thank you, Ms. Wheat, and I appreciate your having me. I have a lot of information, and I'm hoping to get it all in within the 10-minute allotment. But we know that in the United States, we have approximately 55.5 million students in our public and private schools. That's 50 million in our public schools, 5 million in our private schools. And one thing that concerns us is that they're not all dyslexic just because they are struggling to read. Now, I know that's a bit controversial, but please bear with me. We have the 55.5 million, and if we follow the Yale model, which is the 1 out of 5, we know that 20% are dyslexic. And 20% of 55.5 million is 11 million dyslexics. Now, let's see what that actually physically looks like. We would have to take every breathing person in all 5 boroughs of New York City. That would be 8 million people. And then we add in the 3 million that live in Chicago. That's a visual picture of what or how difficult problem dyslexia tends to be. But as we are told by Dr. Joan Uri of Fordham University, and as late as 2017 with Dr. Mark Seidenberg, with his book, Language at the Speed of Sight, we know that not all children are dyslexic. Now, I know that some parents tend to scream because they remember all of the homework battles. There's yelling, there's screaming, there's pleading, there's negotiations, and you find yourself in the middle of a bear fight. I understand that. And I'm not saying that these language-based learning disorders are not problematic. They are. But Dr. Louisa Moats has even gone and cautioned us about lumping all students who are struggling readers into the category of dyslexic. Because we don't know their background. We don't know if they come from a language poor background. We don't know if they're hearing words that you might hear in a home that is professional or middle class. And we also don't know what their school background is like. Did they go to a school that does not believe in the science of reading? And that is a little jab at the whole language schools. But there is an organization called the National Association of Educational Progress. And it's what they call the NAEP scores. And every 2 years, they put out the scores. I'm sure many of you have heard of them. It's called the nation's report card. And these are the 3 grades that are highlighted. But what's key here is uh, we know that the scores don't really change between 4th and 12th grade. I know that's rather scary. So what it means is if we don't catch them by 4th grade, they're gone. Okay. And as a result, we are graduating 63% of students in the United States, 12th grade students in the United States, who are below proficient in reading. And the college professors are looking at them somewhat amazed that they made it this far, but they don't have certain skills. I'll look very quickly at the 3 levels: basic, proficient, and advanced. And again, 37%, only 37% gave a solid performance. And if you think back to your time in school, if you got a 37 on something, you did not pass. All right, let's take a look at the basic, and I'll look at proficient, then we'll move on. Uh, when we're talking about the basic level, we're talking about a severe lack of performance, partial understanding of what they read. They cannot answer simple questions covering what they've read, and they're unable to accurately decode or barely finish the passage in the time that is allotted. And they have limited knowledge of author's purpose, inference, main idea, things of that nature. With proficient, which is the benchmark where we want them to be, we're talking about a solid performance, competent and adequate at understanding. They can make reasonable inferences, read with fluency and accuracy, and they have knowledge of author's purpose, main idea. They can draw conclusions. I'm going to skip the advanced very quickly because basic is where the majority of our students find themselves. Partial understanding, they can't answer simple questions, and they have limited knowledge of certain writing conventions. So below proficient, 83% of African American 12th graders are below proficient. 78% Hispanic Americans are below. The same with Native Americans, 71%, European Americans, 54%, and Asian Americans, 51%. Now, these aren't necessarily dyslexics, but these are clearly students who are struggling with the decoding process. All told, as I mentioned, we have 63% of all American 12th graders who are below proficient. Now, if we're talking about 63%, that means that we're talking about 36,400,000 struggling readers in the United States. Okay. Now we know that, well, I'll get to that in a moment. Let's see what 36 million looks like. To get 36 million struggling readers, you would have to take every single person in the 20 largest cities in the United States. That's what 36 million people look like. And that's occurring in our schools today. Now, if we know that 36 million are struggling readers, and we know that 11 million are dyslexics, that leaves us with a grand total of 25 million students who are struggling to read without any biological interference. So that is our charge as instructors. Clearly, we are doing something wrong. Now, we know about the science of reading. We know about the National Reading Panel, but when you mention it to school systems, the teachers have never heard of it. All right. Now, given the fact that our language is quite problematic, we have one of the most opaque languages in the world. That means that phonograms don't match up to graphemes. Okay. For example, Spanish is 94%. We are 48% sound grapheme correspondence. Now, 55% of it is Latinate, all the way down to the Scandinavian. Okay. And if you doubt that we have Scandinavian in our language, find out where we get our days of the week. Okay. For example, Thursday is Thor's Day. Okay. I'll leave it at that and move on. Our language is quite problematic. We have 9 different ways to produce the long vowel A sound. Now, if students do not receive structured literacy, they have no idea when to use AI versus EA versus EY. Okay, now they're going to have to end up guessing. Now we have 1.6 million words in our language. That's an awful lot of studying and memorizing so that you can apply the language effectively. The opposite of that is the Italian language, where you may have 245 million compared to, 245,000 compared to 1.6 million. So clearly we don't want our students memorizing, we want them processing language. I mentioned the opaqueness of our language. Spanish, again, is 94%. It's WYSIWYG. It's what you see is what you get. So the CH says che. Every time you see the CH in Spanish, it's going to say che. Well, we have a problem in English because, again, we're at 48%, and it's WYSIWYG only through explicit language training. Okay, for example, the CH. Students don't know if it says ch from the Anglo-Saxon, k from the Greek, or ch from the French. They either have to guess or they have to undergo what we hope they will undergo, systematic and explicit language training. Now look at what we have in the English language. If we're not teaching them sound symbol correspondence, they are in a world of trouble. There's no wonder why we don't have more than 37% who are doing well on a particular reading task. They need to know the 44 phonemes in the English language and the fact that those 44 sounds can be completed with over 1,000 different grapheme combinations. So again, we don't want them guessing, but today they are forced to guess. Now, yes, we've done a great job with the dyslexics, but clearly 11 million dyslexics versus 25 million struggling readers, we have plenty of work to do. We still have our work cut out for us. We still need people like Decoding Dyslexia and other reading groups to step up to the plate and push our educational system to deal with the science of reading. Okay, well, they need the explicit and systematic. We move from simple to complex, and the skills are taught and reviewed constantly. I want to get to one other thing. Does anyone know what this is? I'll give you a second. This, what I was asking, it's an Enigma machine. Okay, it's what they used to read codes during World War II. And we've had our Enigma machine for the past 17 years. And it's called the Report of the National Reading Panel. But most school teachers have never heard of it. And it's been almost 20 years.
And thank you, Dr. Dunson. And when during the Q&A portion, if you would like to share any specific slides again, you can certainly do that during that time.
All right, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. We certainly do have our work cut out for us. All right, we're going to move on to panelist number 2, who is Winifred Winston. Winston is an author, a passionate advocate, and an enthusiastic speaker. Serving as Economic Inclusion Program Coordinator for the largest private employer in Baltimore, Winifred interviewed residents from targeted zip codes in Baltimore City, many of whom were illiterate. She was able to see firsthand the impact of how reading difficulties create roadblocks and challenges for adults in employment and higher education pursuits. After working as an administrator of a special education school and going through the IEP process in the public school system with her daughter, Winifred quickly realized Black parents lacked access to accurate information about dyslexia interventions and instructional strategies. Because of going through the IEP process with her daughter, Miss Winston founded Dyslexia Advocation Incorporated to help educate families about dyslexia and the IEP process. Her mission is to equip parents with the necessary tools to help their children become successful readers. Miss Winston is a state leader for Decoding Dyslexia Maryland, board chair of Baltimore County CCAC, holds a Master's of Science in Human Resource Development, and a Bachelor of Science in Mass Communications. We welcome to the floor Miss Winston.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you so much for that warm introduction. So now I'm going to share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So Dr. Dunson gave us a lot of stats on children who don't learn to read, right? I wrote down 63% graduate below proficiency. So what do we know? That they become adults who are still struggling readers in the workplace. And as Jen mentioned, I work for one of the largest employers here in Baltimore City. And I saw firsthand when folks applied for positions because they could not read and they struggled to read and write, they weren't successful on assessment tests and were unable to secure gainful employment or even get promotions. So not only do we help parents with the necessary tools to successfully advocate for their children so that they can become successful readers, Dyslexia Advocation also helps businesses integrate neurodiversity into the workplace for improved performance and success. I immediately saw a need to help adults. I feature Blacks and Dyslexics on Instagram, and I look for everyday dyslexics to feature. And I kept running across adults who were struggling. And they told me that they didn't find out they were dyslexic until they were an adult, until they were in college, or they didn't complete college, or they did find out, but their parents didn't know how to get them the necessary interventions and instructional strategies so that they would learn to read. And so we also know that folks who struggle with reading, they also struggle with executive function. So we also focus on ADHD in the workplace as well. We know a recent study conducted by the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy and Gallup, low literacy levels among US adults could be costing the economy $2.2 trillion a year, okay? And that equated to 54% of US adults aged 16 to 74, they lack proficiency in literacy. And Dr. Dunson gave us a lot of stats on that. So that means that 54% of US adults are reading below the equivalent of a 6th grade level. That's a problem. And we're seeing it show up in the workplace. I was contacted by someone online. He said, I'm all over the place. I'm struggling with my ADHD. And this guy was an attorney. I said, well, how did you find me? He said, someone told me about a live that you did. I'm struggling with my ADHD, having trouble with memory, with organization. He was like, and I need help, and I need someone who can specifically help me with this area. And so I was able to connect him with someone to help him with executive function coaching. But what we might see in the workplace is someone who confuses appointment dates, right? Times, and they miss meetings. They may also have difficulty with planning their work schedules and deadlines, have problems with starting and finishing work tasks. Oh, here's the big one: spelling inconsistent and inaccurate, right? Thank goodness for spell check. They may often have to reread information several times before they can get the meaning. And this we're seeing in folks, one, don't recognize that, hey, there are coping strategies that I could be presented with so I can manage this. And then employers are looking at, okay, well, why don't I have staff who are going for promotions? We know as parents of children who are struggling readers, we know the first thing they struggle with is confidence and having self-esteem. So you take someone who did not know that there was a name for it, or that there could have been interventions to help them along the way. You take that person and take them through school, put them out in the workforce, and now you're saying, oh, shoot for the moon and the stars, and they know that they're struggling internally. We like to call dyslexia and ADHD one of those invisible disabilities. So when I do my Black and Dyslexic and my Everyday Dyslexic series, I want to share with you guys some of the folks that I've interviewed and tell you a little bit about their journey. So I spoke with Ann here. Ann is a successful entrepreneur. Ann is miserable as an entrepreneur. She's not able to focus on what she enjoys because she's in business for herself and she has to focus on running the business and managing staff. She shared with me that during her evaluations, she was always dinged for things that she knew was directly related to her difference. See, her parents knew she was dyslexic, but they thought she would grow out of it. So she never learned to self-advocate and access accommodations, not even in college. She thought that was cheating. She didn't access those accommodations. So what happened? It impacted her in the workplace. So now she's in business, a successful entrepreneur, but it's not what she wants to do, but she knows that she struggles in the workplace and haven't really found the voice to get the help that she needs. I have another gentleman here. This is Eric. He owns Love Barbershop right here in Baltimore City on Howard Avenue. And every time I would go into his barbershop, I'm talking about dyslexia, I'm talking about struggling readers. And I was actually preparing to go to IDA in Portland last year. And I was so excited. I was telling him all about my Airbnb I was going to stay in. And he followed me out and he said, you know, I'm dyslexic. I said, really? He said, yes, I know the young lady who referred you to our shop teaches at a dyslexia school, but it's something about the energy you bring when you come in here and talk about it. He said, I was lumped in special education. I never really got any help and I didn't learn to read. He said, I started doing research on my own and I found so many successful dyslexics. So that helped with my confidence. And then I learned how to use assistive technology. He said, audiobooks were my best friend. He said, but you know what? I still struggled. He said, I believe I could be further along in life if I just would have gotten help. He said, I got my CDL commercial license. He said, but when I opened this barbershop, I felt like, okay, I made it. I made it. And just to hear this grown man tell me, you know, run me down after me getting my hair cut to share with me that he struggled and he still kind of struggled to this day. So I said, hey, Eric, will you mind if I feature you on my Black and Dyslexic series? He said, no, not at all. And he must have a huge following on Instagram because I featured him. And the next time I came in that shop, he said, look, I'm excited. I said, what do you mean? He said, by you sharing my story, he said, it helped so many other people and it helped me. He was like, it's okay that I read slower, but I can read and I can get things done. One of my favorite stories. And here's Monique Smith. Monique is a podcast host, a speaker, an author. She's also an experienced educator. She's got about 30 years in higher education. Monique didn't find out she was dyslexic until she was about 41 years old. And she says that it finally made sense because she didn't know that if you had dyslexia, you may have trouble spelling. She said in her time, she just thought it was where the numbers were reversed or you did the B and the D backwards. And she said how it can impact her at work is that if she sent an email and she had something spelled wrong, she couldn't find it. So it may seem as though she's ignoring a directive, right? Because she couldn't find the spelling error. She said, when I finally got diagnosed, I would just tell them, look, I'm dyslexic. You have to show me and point out the error and don't tell me to sound it out because I don't know the difference between the S, the K, and the C sound. So she was relieved, but again, she was in the workplace and she was struggling. So I tell folks, get comfortable with the uncomfortable. If what Dr. Dunson shared had you shocked, those numbers, We're talking about children and how they're graduating and not learning to read. Well, these young children turn into young adults and adults who are in the workplace and they're not learning how to read. They're struggling with reading. They're struggling with tasks. We know that when they struggle to read and go undiagnosed, they can be unemployed, underemployed, and even incarcerated. We didn't even touch on the school to prison pipeline. So I need folks and businesses to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. Now, 4 steps that employers can take, right? You're an employer, what can you do to be more inclusive to your neurodiverse staff? And I want to specifically talk about dyslexia and ADHD, where there's 4 things you can do. Access. Make your website, your application, and your hiring process accessible so that it can work for all learners. And make sure you're maximizing the technology you already have in place, right? Microsoft and Google, they have a ton of extensions and different things that you can utilize to help those who may have issues with reading and with executive function. Accommodate. Put information about accommodations on your website, share it throughout the interview and orientation process. You know, make new employees feel so comfortable about accessing accommodations from the onset so that later on they will feel comfortable self-advocating and telling you what they need to be successful in their role. And then training. Train your interview staff on interview protocol, and then train the rest of your staff on disability sensitivity. You know, supervisors and managers need to be aware. They need to know about this. Again, it's an invisible hidden disability. When someone is having an evaluation, think about Anne, and everything you're dinging them on is directly related to their difference and what makes them special and unique. And then ask the experts. You've got 3 of them right here on the line with you. Dr. Dunson, myself, and Ms. VanCleef is coming up next. We specifically work with those who are neurodiverse. Dr. Dunson done hit me with numbers and science. I know he knows his stuff, right? And I'm seeking out adults and businesses, and I'm helping them, guiding them through the process of integrating neurodiverse into the workplace. We know with EAP, Employee Assistance Program, you can call and get help with financial literacy. You can get assistance with wills and legal documents. Why can't you call and get maybe 3 sessions of executive function coaching, right? And an employee will be more likely to call that number and talk to a third party and get help so they can be successful on the line. So this is the reason why I'm so passionate about helping businesses help adults, because we know that children are not learning to read. During DyslexiaCon, 70% of struggling readers in 1st grade are still struggling readers in 8th grade, right? So we know that they're still struggling. And then I'm going to add on, then they become adults. And that statistic, it hasn't changed in the last 25 years. So thank you so much. And I can't wait for your Q&A and to answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Winifred. That was very informative, and I love your enthusiasm. I know a lot about those ADHD dyslexics because I have one of those in my house. So thanks for that. All right, we're going to move on to panelist number 3. That is Ashley VanCleef. And Ashley is not only an educational attorney, but is also a certified special educator. She has served students with disabilities as a special education teacher, school and state level administrator, and school attorney. In the past, Ms. VanCleef led the Resolution and Compliance Unit and was the 504 coordinator for Montgomery County Public Schools. She also worked as a resource teacher in Howard County Public Schools. Ms. VanCleef provided training for special educators on instruction frameworks and interventions, the administration of Woodcock-Johnson assessment, and writing and conducting IEPs. Ms. VanCleef has experience working for the State Department of Education in Texas and Oklahoma. She speaks locally and nationally, recently presenting at the COPA National Conference, and will speak this February at the Learning Disabilities Association International Conference. Ms. VanCleef is a former adjunct faculty member of Morgan State University, where she taught legal aspects of educational administration and has been a guest lecturer for other colleges. She's a member of the Maryland State Bar Association, Frederick County Bar Association, International Dyslexia Association, and the LDA. In her spare time, Ms. VanCleef enjoys spending time with her family, volunteering with her church youth group, and paddleboarding. We would like to welcome to the floor Ms. VanCleef.
I'm going to go ahead and start talking, and I didn't have any materials to present. I will have a handout that can be available to participants later on, but thank you all for having me here. I'm not going to waste your time and have you wait while we get this video up. You're just going to see my face, so you're not missing out on anything. As Jen said, I am a special education teacher as well as an attorney. I feel like I spend the majority of my days wearing both hats, more so probably the special education teacher piece. What I'm going to talk about is just backing up a little bit. So we heard the statistics and all of the information about the science of reading and how important it is. And then Winifred's talking about kind of the end result, where we end up from an employer standpoint as adults. There we go. I think the video is working, maybe. Wonderful, glad that's working. I didn't see myself on the screen, so I wasn't sure what was going on there. So Winifred was talking a little bit about what happens in the workforce for our people who are dyslexic and they get out there and then they start to struggle whether they knew they were dyslexic or not. And so I get the back pedal on that. And so as we think about our students with disabilities who are in school, whether they're dyslexic or not, but they have a disability, we look at how do we make sure we get them that help before they become that adult with dyslexia that's struggling in their workplace. And so typically that's going to be an IEP or an individualized education program. That's where I spend my days. So as we think about that individualized education program, we think, how does that start? So most of you, this is what's hard about virtual. I don't know where you are in a process. And so I'm going to just kind of start at the beginning. If you have a child that's dyslexic or has another reading disability and is not on an IEP, then we start with, let's do the child find. Child find is a duty or an obligation that comes under the Federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that school systems have an obligation to find children with disabilities. That means to find them, locate them, evaluate them, and then identify them if they have a disability. The way that starts typically is a parent referral or a teacher referral to an IEP process. Once that referral takes place, they sit down and hold a screening meeting. At the screening meeting, they talk about what is the disability. And this is where I say to parents, did you share you've had your child in tutoring for the last 2 years? Did you share that you spend 5 hours every night on homework? They have to know this information to realize that there is a disability there and we need to evaluate to figure out what that is. After we go through that screening and evaluation process, we come back to the table and we identify whether the student has a disability or not. As we look at that disability, for most of you who are tuning in tonight, that's probably dyslexia, which falls under a specific learning disability. If you have your child evaluated privately, they'll call it a specific learning disorder or specific learning impairment. But as we look at a specific learning disability under the Federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that is the educational version of that disability, and dyslexia certainly falls in that. So as we come back to that table and we look at whether a student has that disability, we then look at, do they have a need for specially designed instruction? A need for specially designed instruction means, do we need to teach something in a different way so that they can get where they need to be back on grade level, close that gap between where their learning is and that of the grade level expectation? So as we look at that piece of it, do we have a disability? And then do we have a need for specially designed instruction? That means we have a child who qualifies for an IEP. So after that, we come back to the table with that draft IEP and we take a look at what is going to be that plan for how we're going to help that child with dyslexia or another disability move forward. So they'll be labeled. I have parents that get very nervous about that, but we also have to remember that a label can mean also you have rights. So if you're a student who's in general education, who may have a disability, but you don't have a 504 plan or an IEP plan, you're in general education and you don't necessarily have the same rights and protections as students with the disability. And those disability rights and protections come under a plan and come under a label. And so while that can be frustrating for some parents, I always say that label drives extra protections and services for your child. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing, even though sometimes it can feel that way. It's also important for our students to know what that disability is so that they don't become that adult who goes, I always thought I was stupid. I didn't know why I couldn't learn. I didn't know why I didn't do well in school. So we want to make sure that we keep those rights protected by moving forward with one of those plans. The difference between the plans are a 504 is just accommodation. So you may have a child with dyslexia who just needs some minor accommodations. They're doing pretty well. Maybe you got some good early intervention in place. And so they're doing okay. They just need some extra time. That's a 504 plan. But if they need a specialized reading program, if they need a structured literacy program, then they really need to be on that IEP so that we can make sure we have that right instruction in place. And then as we look at development of that plan, those goals and objectives that are going to give us those metrics to see whether that child is making progress and moving forward with that plan. If they're not, then again, those rights and protections come into place so that we can make sure that we can move forward in a way that the plan is supposed to work. We're supposed to make sure we're addressing those needs of our students with disabilities so that they can improve. A million years ago in my past lifetime, we called it an admission review and dismissal, or an ARD. And an ARD was really the idea that we are supposed to bring kids into special education. We're supposed to review that progress, and then we're supposed to dismiss them. We're supposed to fix our kids with disabilities. Now, dyslexia is never going to be fixed completely. It's never going to go away. If you're dyslexic, you're dyslexic. But the effects can certainly be lessened. And as those effects are lessened, our students could move from an IEP to a 504, or to even not even needing that support, again, if they receive the right kind of intervention in the right amount of time and by the right people who know what they're doing and providing the really science of reading as we think about structured literacy. So that's the beginning of the process, and that's how we get into it. As we look at those evaluations, I advise my clients to make sure that we include an educational assessment. Most school systems are doing a Woodcock-Johnson, which isn't a great tool, but it's usually what they're using. They're doing a psychological assessment. They're doing a speech language assessment if you're encouraging them to do so. As we think about dyslexia, it's a language-based learning disability. So we want to make sure that we have a language assessment to dive in to see if there's something deeper there that maybe they're not realizing, because it's a great, sweet kid and they're kind of quiet and they don't talk a lot, or they do talk a lot, but they don't see the filler words and the word retrieval issues or some of those deeper language components that could be missing for our students with language-based learning disabilities. So I'm always asking for a speech language assessment to go along with that evaluation for dyslexia. And then I'm always asking also for an occupational therapy evaluation. We want to look at their visual motor integration. Most of our dyslexics have a hard time spelling, but then they also typically, 90% of my caseload that I represent are kids with dyslexia. And so you'll see their handwriting, it starts to go like this. And so it starts at the top and they're kind of going down, and then it just continues to go off to the side. Their letters are formed with reversals at times. They can have paper that's just all jumbled on the page, and their letters are all over the place, and it's not necessarily where it needs to be. And so as we think about that, could be a visual motor integration issue, and our occupational therapists are going to identify that and see if there's some additional support that's needed. So those are my recommendations whenever we look at that identification process. As we move further into whether they qualify or not, so many of our students with a specific learning disability or dyslexia typically also will have ADHD. Now, whether that ADHD is due to I look like I have attention problems because I can't read and I'm off task because of that in the classroom, or whether they truly have ADHD, certainly the symptoms are there. Whenever they do have ADHD and learning disabilities and they're so intertwined, we call that multiple disabilities. And so again, as we think about what is an educational disability under the law, there can be a multiple disabilities designation for those disabilities that are so intertwined that we can't decide which one comes first. So it's the chicken or the egg. And if we can't decide, then we call it multiple for those kids that have both of those conditions. So what do we do if the school system fails to identify? So if you've got a child and they're coming into 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and we're realizing they're dyslexic and the school system completely missed the boat here, they should have realized it. There were certainly indicators there, and here they are and they can't read. What are parents' recourse? We'll certainly go ahead and move forward with that IEP process, but you do have recourse and you have rights. Those typically come under what we call the procedural safeguards. If you've ever sat in an IEP meeting, it's that giant book they give you at the beginning and they say, did you receive it? And you say yes, and then you never read it. It is lengthy, it's boring, it will put you to sleep every single time if you have any insomnia. And so thinking about those are your rights, what they outline in that booklet are the right to state complaint, mediation, and due process. You never want to end up in a due process situation. It is lengthy, it is painful, it is expensive, but it is certainly available to parents as they are looking at whether their child has been identified or whether their child is receiving what they're supposed to within the school system. So there's certainly, again, those rights and protections that are available. If you use one of those, the remedies that are available to you through those processes are typically what's called compensatory educational services. So if a child has not been identified or is not receiving the appropriate type of supports within the school system, and we go through one of those processes, then you can ask for compensatory educational services. That typically comes in the form of tutoring, or if my child didn't receive 100 hours of instruction that they should have received, what are we going to do to make that right? Well, tutoring is typically the means to make that right. Whenever it becomes more egregious, then we start looking at maybe a private placement is what we need to be able to make that right. As we think about our students who are getting older, and I have students who are in the 8th grade and the parents have come to me and they're reading on a 2nd grade reading level. You know, those are cases where we may have to have that child go to a private school in order to truly remediate that significant gap that is unfortunately growing without the right kind of instruction. But those are the remedies that are available to parents if things are not going the way that they're supposed to. And then I wanted to spend a couple of minutes, and I know I'm running short on time here. One of the topics for tonight was what don't we hear in regards to dyslexia? And I'm going to switch that up a little bit to what do we hear and why is it incorrect? So I hear so many times that you have to be 2 years behind to qualify. Well, if you think about a child who's 7, and if we say we're gonna continue to wait and we're gonna wait till they get 2 years behind, then they're 9. And if they're 9 and it's that between ages 9 and 10 where the brain starts to have solidified and we start to see it become more difficult for them to learn. If we wait that long, then we know from all the research that it's going to then take them 4 times this long to learn how to read. So waiting is absolutely unacceptable. I see so many of my parents who they feel that giant snowball coming behind them. They're creeping up on 9 and 10 and their child's still not reading and they still don't have phonemic awareness. It's serious. We have to address it. And there is nothing in the law that says you have to be 2 years below in order to receive an IEP. You have to have 1, a disability, which dyslexia qualifies, and 2, a need for specially designed instruction. That need is not 2 years below. It's just a need for specially designed instruction. And so thinking about that, that's critical as we think about making sure that the child qualifies and receives the intervention that they need. I also hear so many times, well, give us a chance to try some intervention and see how the child responds. Well, what we know, and this is in a federal letter from the Office of Special Education Programs, is that we don't have to say, let's wait. We don't have to say, let's see how they respond. What we have to do is we have to identify, evaluate, locate, and provide services to students with disabilities. So in thinking about doing that, if they're saying, well, this is available to everyone in general education, that's great that something's available to everyone in general education. But if a child has a disability, they need specially designed instruction based upon that disability, and that needs to be in an IEP and it needs to be documented. And then that's where those rights and protections come in to make sure that they receive those pieces. And that kind of feeds into something that parents hear, well, we have universal design for learning, and that may be something that some of you all that are listening in tonight have heard. Well, we have universal design for learning. Everybody gets graphic organizers, or everybody gets speech to text and text to speech, especially now that we're virtual. Well, it doesn't matter. For a student with a disability, if that's a disability related need, it needs to be on their IEP and it needs to be documented. Again, this comes from the Office of Special Education Programs and some of their clarifying documents, which will be in my fact sheet. You'll certainly have links to those. So as we think about, we have 1 in 5, in most statistics that's the way we see it. 1 in 5 people have dyslexia. And so as we think, that's a lot, that's a huge number. Well, those 1 in 5 are not going to all need the same intervention. It is going to vary based upon the type of dyslexia they have, based upon the severity of their dyslexia. And whenever you have a school system that tells you, well, oh, you're dyslexic, you go to Wilson. We have a Wilson class for that. Or we have a language foundations class for that. Know that you can say to that school system, that may not be the right intervention for your child. Jen and I were involved in a case this summer, which had a wonderful outcome for that family, where we basically saw that in the decision, that it's not a one size fits all approach, and school systems can't take that approach and it be considered that free appropriate public education for our students with disabilities. So I think I'm probably 1 minute over my time. But I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. If you have questions, again, we're here for the Q&A, and I am more than happy to answer those. I cannot provide legal advice because, again, this is just for informational or educational purposes, but I'm more than happy to do that if you were to contact my office and have an individual call. So as we're moving forward in that Q&A, make sure that if it's something you want me to answer, that it's a hypothetical, and I'll be happy to speak on that type of a situation.
Fabulous. Thank you, Ashley. I know there are so many ins and outs of the law that are very complicated and hard to understand for us parents. So it's nice to have you to answer some questions. Okay, speaking of, we're gonna move into the Q&A portion. And we are actually going to start you guys off with a question. It's for each of our panelists. We'll start with Dr. Dunson and go on to Ms. Winston and then on to Ms. VanCleef. So the first question is, what is your top advice for a parent struggling to get their child help? What's the thing that you would recommend the most?
I would encourage them to understand that they have an incredible amount of power. If they are a public school, a family, then they can request psychoeducational testing, and the school cannot say no. They may not say no. It has to happen. And with that psychoeducational testing, a lot is revealed. We understand their cognitive processes. We understand their working memory. We understand how they deal with sound. We understand how they deal with phonemic principles, specifically decoding nonsense words. Do they understand the syllable types or syllable division? All of this is key information. So the very first stop would be their school and request a psychoeducational evaluation.
Thank you. Ms. Winston?
Yes, I'm going to lump them all together, but educate yourself about dyslexia, about learning differences, about your child's strengths and also their weaknesses, and then equip yourself with the tools, access resources, ask for help, partner with other parents. Here in Maryland and Baltimore City specifically, we can go to Partners for Success. Every jurisdiction has an office where they provide free information, books, resources around special education services, and empower yourself to advocate for your child. Don't be afraid. If you're in that IEP meeting and you don't understand something, I would tell them, that's teacher talk. Could you break that down for me? And I'm a former educator, but educate yourself, empower yourself, and equip yourself with the tools. Ask for help. Connect with those who know, who have been through this, because you can ask for an evaluation, but if you're not asking them to check the right areas, and then you don't understand that evaluation, then you're not able to successfully advocate for your child.
I'll just add on to that a little bit and give parents a couple of specific names to ask for. So as you're asking for an evaluation, ask for that comprehensive test of phonological processing, or the CTOP. And the reason why I say that is I see so many parents who come into me whose children were not identified as dyslexic, and no one ever did a CTOP. And I'm like, wait, we need that information. That helps us identify whether they're dyslexic. Another test that I like to see is the Pfeiffer Assessment of Reading, or the FAR. Again, these are good tools to identify some of those underlying foundational pieces that are missing that help us identify whether a student is dyslexic or not. With those evaluations, that can drive the right kind of decision making at that IEP table. And so that's a piece that I would certainly encourage parents. The other piece is get help. You don't have to have an attorney at the table, but get somebody else, because you're sitting there as an emotional parent. It's your job to be emotional. That's what you do, and you advocate for your child. But it's hard to think about all of the logistics and the laws and the pieces that you're trying to manage when you're sitting there and you're an emotional as a parent. So get somebody else to go with you, have them take notes, or just to be an extra set of ears as you're going through that process.
Great, thank you all. And Ashley, while you're there, we have a question from one of our listeners here, and they would like to know, are the state complaints public information?
Great information. So if you go on the Maryland State Department of Education's website, you actually can find past state complaints. They'll be redacted, and so you won't see the student's name or the parent's information or even some of the school staff members' information, but you can find those. And you'll oftentimes see the results of that is an award of compensatory educational services, and the parents have to get back to the IEP table to help determine what that is. One thing that I would want parents to take away, if that's something they want to file on their own, is be very specific in your remedy. If you write in your remedy, I want 60 hours of compensatory educational services, if the school system offers you that, then the complaint goes away and the state does not investigate it. So many times I see where parents write a very vague remedy, the school system offers it, and then their complaint's not investigated, and that's extremely frustrating. So just a little tidbit, be very specific, and it could be something the school system offers you, and then everybody can move forward without having to wait that 60 days for the investigation.
Great, thank you. Okay, I have one for Dr. Dunson. What early signs should this parent be aware of when suspecting dyslexia or dysgraphia?
I would look for, now let me be clear, letter reversals at a particular age are very common. So there is an old wives' tale that only letter reversals is an indication, but we can have confusion with the N and the M, certain letters that are formed similarly. We also know that, as Ashley pointed out, dyslexia is a problem with the manipulation of sound and the processing of sound. So you can actually run across students who have a difficult time following multiple step directions. That could be a very nice red flag.
Thank you for that. And we have one for Miss Winston. The person is asking, whom should I talk to at my job about my dyslexia? Who would you suggest they reach out to?
Human resources. You want to go to your human resources department. You definitely want to go to HR.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. I have another one for Ashley, for Miss VanCleef. This one is, let's see, I'm sorry, it's about, can a parent who is homeschooling their child contact Child Find if they suspect dyslexia, or should they just go through the child's homeschool?
It's a really great question. And sometimes it depends on the school district. The best place to start is that Child Find office, and to see if they want to send you to the child's school. Sometimes if you go to your school, then they'll send you to Child Find and you'll get bounced back and forth. As Jen said, I worked for Montgomery County Public Schools, and I always tell parents, that you're going to get bounced around. Sometimes you'll get to the Child Find office and they'll say no. And so as someone who is homeschooled, you still have that same Child Find right, whether you continue to keep your child in the home or whether you decide to send them to the public school system. But absolutely go to the Child Find office as a starting point, and just know that they might send you to your local school. You may have to prove that you can enroll, but what I tell parents in this situation, whether you're in a homeschool situation or whether you're in a private school enrollment, you want to register but not enroll. And if you use that language, I'm just registering my child because I want to go through the IEP process, then you don't have to enroll them formally. That will allow you to go through, get the Child Find meeting, have the screening, have the eligibility meeting, have them develop an IEP. And then if you reject that IEP and you say, I want to continue to homeschool, that's certainly your right. If your child is in a private school, the school system can then still offer you a service plan if you want to keep your child in that private school. And that service plan is basically what the school system decides to offer you. You don't have the same kind of rights. But if you wanted the school system to pay for your private school because you feel like what they've offered in that IEP is not appropriate, that's another option as well. It's a much lengthier conversation we would want to have, but that is another option that's available for parents. Whether they're homeschooling or private school, you absolutely have a right to engage in the Child Find process.
Great, thank you for that. I have another one for Dr. Dunson. This is a great one. Can an older child or an adult with dyslexia learn to read?
Absolutely. The brain is very plastic. In fact, at Kildonan, we used to, it's a school for dyslexics in New York. We used to call ourselves brain surgeons. Well, some people did, because that's what we did. We sort of operated on the brain by teaching the English language forensically. And there's no such thing as anyone who is too old or too young, provided they've been exposed to the alphabetic principle. They can be taught syllable type, syllable division, as I mentioned earlier, and they can learn how to read. Now, we would have to spend some time to make sure that their phonemic awareness ability is up to snuff, and if it's not, we can repair that as well. Because keeping in mind that they must be able to identify sounds in a spoken stream, a spoken a word stream, or a phoneme stream, and they have to be able to identify those sounds and manipulate them. But absolutely, regardless of how old they are, they can be taught how to decode.
Great, thanks. This one is for Winifred. You mentioned pipeline to prison. What is pipeline to prison?
I'm talking about kids who go from school to prison, and they start looking at that data in third grade. There was a study out in Texas that showed that 80% of inmates were illiterate and 40% were dyslexic. And a lot of folks don't know this, but Donald Trump signed in 2018 the First Step Act, and that mandated that federal prisons must screen and treat dyslexia. So you want to screen and treat them in prison, but we can't get school systems to do what they need to do, because when I mentioned that statistic of 70% of first graders are still struggling in eighth grade, nothing about that has changed in 25 years. So let that sink in. The president signed a bill to say, I need you to screen and treat federal inmates for dyslexia, that language. So we know that kids are going straight from school to prison.
Great, thanks for explaining that. Ashley, what about states that tell parents and schools that specialized dyslexia instruction is not specialized instruction? Our state of Texas Education Agency gives guidance to parents and schools that dyslexia is initiated through a 504 instead of the IDEA, even when dyslexia instruction is recommended.
So I used to work for the Texas Education Agency, and they have a wonderful dyslexia handbook that's been published in Texas. It's a wonderful piece that they have done in moving forward with their dyslexia advocacy across the state, and hopefully we'll get there in Maryland one of these days. That handbook I was looking at a couple of years ago at the IDA conference, thinking, wow, if only we could get to this point in Maryland. And I know they've even had some revisions to that since then. Again, as we look at the federal definition of what is a IEP and who qualifies for that. And when I was in Texas, it wasn't ARD. I don't know if it still is or not. But who qualifies? Again, it is a student who has a disability. Dyslexia falls under the definition of a specific learning disability and has a need for specially designed instruction. Part of your question said specially designed instruction. And that truly what it is. So if we are denying our students, and we have a huge issue in Texas where we had our cap, and that's hopefully getting better, where they were capping our students with disabilities at around 8%, that we're denying them their rights to have an IEP. An IEP, and where we cross over into that, is that specially designed instruction. It's more than an accommodation. And again, just because they have dyslexia interventions or specially designed instruction available for everyone in Texas doesn't mean it may not be what's specially designed for that child based upon their disability. So it's certainly something that I would say call your parent resource centers. There are technical centers in Texas that are great for technical assistance. The Texas Education Agency, I used to do the technical assistance line when I worked for their compliance department, can certainly assist with that and be able to help you some more. But again, it's a federal piece that comes straight out of IDEA, and states cannot lessen those rights as they look at how they move forward with their policies and procedures.
Thanks. Okay. So, Dr. Dunson, I'm going to combine these two questions. They were two separate, but I think I can make it into a two-part question. So the first part is, your new book is geared towards professionals in the field. Is that just for professionals, or do you think parents would find value in it? And then the second part would be, what other books would you recommend for educators who currently teach structured literacy?
Okay, the new book, Understanding the Twice Exceptional Learner, I believe is a good source for all parents. Yes, it's geared specifically for students at the university level. In fact, it's being required in the Netherlands, well, the North and South Holland, where it's being required because one of the authors is a professor there. Eleanor Van Guren. Specifically, the first book, where it's talking about how to teach students with language-based learning disorders, I have been told, and I believe this to be true, that you can do basic language remediation with that book. Some parents complain that we're trying to give them 80-minute sessions, and yes, that would be difficult, but I still think if you break it up, you have a nice resource to understand all of the parts of the English code, all of the Latin, the Greek, the Anglo-Saxon, everything from the simple to the complex. And I think they're both wonderful resources. There are a few other books that are out there. Obviously, you want to read anything by Louisa Moats. You want to read anything by Stanislaus Dehaene. You want to read anything by Dr. Donald Boltrup right here at the University of Maryland. He has a wonderful set of resources revolving around how the brain processes language. So there's no shortage of resources for you as a parent or for you as a professional to bone up your skills.
Can I jump in real quick and just add to that?
Of
Parents,
course.
don't be afraid to take those books into the IEP meeting with you. I did that. And when the psychologist said, well, dyslexia is a very broad term, I pulled out the book. Let me get a book. I said, you know, it says that right here. And when they say that, and I read right out of the book. I talked her language. I spoke her language. So don't be afraid to read those books and ask for clarification so you can speak their language. And as he said, a lot of them don't even know about it. So after the IEP meeting, I would shoot the IEP chair as well as the special educator. I would shoot them, you know, the article or the book title that I had at the meeting.
All right. And I know we're running after 8, but we do have a couple more questions if you guys don't mind sticking around to answer the last few. And Winifred, the last one here specifically for you can you name some organizations that help people with dyslexia and or other learning disabilities with jobs and training, or colleges? So I guess older, are there organizations that help?
Well,
dyslexic?
I'm going to taunt Decoding Dyslexia because they helped me so much, and it just allowed me to access other resources. But if you're in college, you can go to your, it's in student affairs. Every college has a disability service center, and you can get assistance and assessments there. And when you're in the workplace and you need assistance, you can contact an organization like Decoding Dyslexia, Dyslexia Advocation. What we do is we do the legwork for parents and adults to get them to the right resources, right? What's the right tutor? I paid for the wrong tutor 2 or 3 times before I knew she was dyslexic. How do I find someone to do a neurological evaluation? Like I was about to say, Ashley, about what Ms. VanCleef said. She said, which 3 tests to ask for, right? We're going to get you to people who already know that's what you should test for. And then also specialized tutoring and the advocacy services. So I want to do something that wasn't available and wasn't offered for me. I want to do that legwork for parents and adults to get you to the right place so you can help yourself and your children.
Okay, and this one also popped up. It piggybacks on, I think, what you just said, but also one that was asked earlier. So what if the Human Resources Department is not knowledgeable about dyslexia? What should the person do?
You want to get an advocate, right? You want to get an advocate, and that's when we want to get into advocating for yourself, where we can talk about ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and getting an advocate involved, an attorney involved, so that you can say things the correct way and ask for reasonable accommodations. But again, reach out for assistance. There is no one sure way answer because every employer is different, and what you need to do your job may not look the same as someone else.
And one last one here that I see for Ms. VanCleef. How often should evaluations with school be redone after getting a dyslexia confirmation?
Great question. So a reevaluation is required every 3 years, but parents can ask for it really as often as they feel is necessary. One of the reasons why I recommend the CTOP for our dyslexics is it can be used to progress monitor. So as we look at the manual, in the back, one of the components of this assessment is to see whether the child has made progress in the intervention they're in. And so different tests allow you to reassess within certain windows. So for instance, a Woodcock-Johnson educational assessment, you're only supposed to do once a year. A CTOP, I don't know the directions on, and Jen could probably answer this, how often you can give that assessment. The Pfeiffer assessment of reading can be given about every 45 days. So different assessments can happen at different intervals, and they can be used for progress monitoring. But if it's for reevaluation, and the purposes of reevaluation within IDEA are for, do we continue to have the correct disability label for the child of the 13 disability categories, or do we need to do something different from a programming standpoint? And so as we think about for programming, are we providing the right interventions? Are we progress monitoring to making sure that they're making progress in what we're providing? Then it might be necessary to do that reevaluation. Typically, we look at that not happening more than once a year. And so you don't want to call for a reevaluation, every 3 months or something of that nature. But it's something that parents can ask for at any point in time when they feel like maybe there's something new. Maybe they've discovered they were with, somebody over the holiday who said, you know what, I think there's really something going on with your child's speech. You should have a speech evaluation. You can ask for a reevaluation, even if you just had one 3 months before, if you think there's a new area that needs to be tested that wasn't tested previously. And certainly I encourage parents to do that, and encourage parents to make sure they have the right assessments completed so that we can also use them for that progress monitoring purpose.
Okay, and we have one last question. It's for Dr. Dunson, which is another great one. We've had some great questions. We appreciate everybody popping these in here. So they're really helpful. Dr. Dunson, how do you know when a child just can't progress with their skills and then just accommodate, or do we just never give up trying? And what if the child doesn't prefer technology?
I would say we never give up trying. As long as they are, and this may be somewhat touchy, and unless we're dealing with a cognitive impairment that's based upon a traumatic brain injury, okay? But if it's just something that is neurological in origin, like an SLI or dyslexia itself, I would continue with the administration of evidence-based reading instruction, because they are going to process eventually. I believe that they will get it. I've had students where it takes them a solid year to actually raise themselves by 2 grade levels. I've had other students that did it in 7 months, and they raised several grade levels in that time period. I would not give up unless it's a traumatic brain injury situation, where in my experience, they will only be able to progress so far. But if we are talking about, and I hate to use the word normal, but we're talking about typical students, they will progress if given the right set of instruction, multisensory, so that their we know that there are 3 neurological pathways where we have the visual, the auditory, and the tactile kinesthetic. If you use multisensory, you can spread the language training out over those 3 platforms so that we don't have to worry about if their visual processing is a huge problem, because we can build that while we're using the auditory and the tactile kinesthetic. Multisensory instruction is the key.
Okay, we'll keep trying. I'm not going to give up. All right, so that concludes the question and answer portion, and we would really like to thank all of our panelists for tonight. We've learned a lot, and I'm glad that the participants were able to ask you questions. So we appreciate the time and energy and information that you have given us to put on the webinar, and we could have not done it without you. We also thank the audience for watching this evening and asking questions. As noted earlier, we will have the recorded version available to attendees within 2 business days. We would appreciate it if you would fill out our post-webinar survey, which you will get. And we also want you to know and so that we know what we can improve. And if you're interested in more information or events, please visit iepinc.net or the Facebook page for our updates. And I'm sure you could find Dr. Dunson, Ms. Winston, and Ms. VanCleef also somewhere on social media, LinkedIn, or other social platforms. So thank you very much. And you all have a good evening.
Thank you.
I will end the broadcast now, so it's going to feel abrupt, but thank you all for attending. Thank you very much.